welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And on today's episode, we are looking at the work-life balance. We've got a couple of dystopian films which really embrace that fact and have two people which are doing quite different jobs, I would say. But how are they balancing their lives and their personal lives in these dystopian worlds? So what are we looking at today then, Matt?
So we've got two real cult classics today from around the same period. 1984's Repo Man is up first, directed by Alex Cox, and 1985's Brazil, directed by Terry Gilliam.
Yes, Terry Gilliam returns to the podcast once again. This is the third time we've had a Terry Gilliam film which we're going to be analysing on the show. So yeah, excited to get into that one. And equally excited to talk about Repo Man, because I think there's a lot to sort of talk about in that. But is it dystopian? Is it not? Well, we'll sort of delve into that as the episode goes on.
So shall we get things started with Repo Man, James?
Yeah, why not?
What's this?
Charming friends you got there, Otto.
Thanks. I made them myself.
I had a lobotomy in the end.
Lobotomy? Isn't that for loonies?
Not at all. A friend of mine had one.
I do my best thinking on the bus. That's how come I don't drive, see?
You don't even know how to drive.
I don't want to know how. I don't want to learn, see? The more you drive, the less intelligent you are.
So Repo Man from 1984, written and directed by Alex Cox. James, I don't think you'd seen this film before, had you?
No, I thought that I had, but I think I've seen a completely different film. I think I've seen something with Bruce Willis in, which has a similar kind of title. I can't remember what it was. Something Repo, something about repossess.
Repo Men.
Repo Men. That's the
With
one
Jude
that
Law.
I'd seen, yes.
Yeah, which is also quite dystopian, but I think is rubbish.
Fair enough. That's why we covered Repo Man and not Repo Men this series.
Yeah, I think you would remember if you'd seen this film, because even though I haven't seen this in a good 10 or more years and couldn't remember any of the plot really, a lot of this really sticks in your head because it is a batshit weird movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it is off the wall, isn't it? It's very, very satirical, lots of like parodies of stuff. And it's the same with Brazil, which we're going to be talking about later. But I think there's something about the world that Alex Cox is showing in this. And I said a little bit in the intro just then, it's kind of dystopian, like it's got dystopian elements, but I think it's closer to something like The Warriors, which we looked at previously, because it's kind of set in that period of time where it's just a bit in the future, but it's very close to present day. I kind of had that impression when I was watching it.
Yes, totally, yeah. And similar to The Warriors, although you see more of it in Repo Man, you don't see a great deal of the society. It's more a dystopian lens on a very small segment of society, which is what The Warriors was as well. Obviously, we have got government goons kind of
yeah,
on the periphery of Repo Man, you know, and in the background of pretty much half the film. But it's really that focused lens on this crew of repossession guys, and that's our way into the world here.
Yeah, and let's talk about the world then, because it's all set in New Mexico, isn't it? And it's sort of, they make a big point at the beginning with the road map that they show that it's near Los Alamos, which is where the Manhattan Project took place, and they're just down the road from Roswell. So it's got, like, New Mexico has this thing about it where it's very close to all of these alien conspiracy theories. Obviously, that's where they created nuclear weapons. It's got quite a heavy history in terms of science and science fiction, I would say. So do you think that sort of having a film set in that particular part of the world straight off the bat, do you think that kind of sets it up for kind of a sci-fi film?
Yeah, totally. And I have to confess that was completely lost on me because my American geography is not very good. And
Same here, to be fair.
I thought that this was set in California. I didn't realize that these cities were in New Mexico, not California. So that readjusts my understanding of the film because we watched that documentary at the Sci-Fi London Festival last year that was all about, was it about Roswell or just like why they're New Mexico? And I've seen a few other documentaries. There is this sense to me as a Brit from very far away that Roswell is like this just magnet for weirdos because of the UFO history, but like oddballs love to congregate there and have little conferences and stuff about UFOs, but it seems to attract that weirdness, I guess, and that really works for Repo Man. But I guess, to be honest, like Los Angeles and that area of California can have a similar feel. So when I thought it was set in California, it seems like a lot of weirdos like to congregate in Los Angeles as well, and there's this kind of like underbelly of Los Angeles where weirdos congregate. So I think that vibe of the film that reached my brain, even though I was completely in the wrong location. But Roswell's definitely a weirder place, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in there subconsciously, isn't it? And it's this collection of characters which we're following, it's quite an eclectic bunch, isn't it? Everyone's quite quirky and they've got their own sort of funny little personality traits. But first off, we should probably talk about the main character who we're following, which is this character of Otto, who's this kind of disaffected young man who's living in this city in New Mexico. And we're introduced to him in his first job, which is just at a supermarket, right? He's just stocking up cans and he's already riling against this sense of authority that's in the society. He's like, he quits his job basically in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, quite
fired.
explosively. Yeah.
But
quits or gets fired. Like he's very deliberately getting himself fired, isn't he? He tells his boss, "Fuck you." I think he shoves him and then gets chased out by the... Yeah. I don't know, like if it's a security guard or just a cop who is hanging around at the convenience store, but yeah, he's like, he just doesn't fit in this quote unquote normal world as much as we see of the normal world in Repo Man. That's like, I guess that's the only normal job we see because no one who works for the government is normal, and the Repo Men are not normal. So the most normal sort of normal society that we see is that convenience store job that is your introduction to Otto, and it's just like Otto does not fit in the normal world.
Yeah, and that's sort of accentuated by the fact that 5 seconds later you see him just outside of this weird building, like in some sort of car park in the middle of a mosh pit. But it just seems so random because it's not even like there's no band playing or anything.
Yeah.
They're just outside, just like punching each other. And then his mate comes up who has been in prison and he's like, "Oh, how you doing?" And it's just like, it's random, but it's kind of like they've got no place to go. And they're sort of like, they're a bit lost as well at the same time because like they are just moshing out in some random area.
Yeah, moshing's generous because moshing does, like you said, there would normally be a band and it's much more structured. Yeah. It is just a very loose but friendly brawl that they're having. Like they're all just sort of, you fight one person, you bounce off, you might get shoved by another one. I guess that is what a mosh pit's like. But yeah, they're punks, aren't they? And this I would say is a very punk film. It's about a punk and it has a punk kind of sensibility to it in the way that everything rails against the nature of authority and normal society and rebels against that. Feels very punk to me.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, that does lean into dystopias, doesn't it? Because like when we've looked at cyberpunk in the past, like punk's in the title there, but all of that kind of stuff, it's rebelling against the authorities, isn't it? And that's kind of like the punk mantra almost. And I mean, like Alex Cox went on to direct the Sid and Nancy film about the guy from the Sex Pistols. So he's got that kind of like interest in it. And also like he went to go and get Iggy Pop to be to do the soundtrack for this. He went to his house to talk to him. So he's a big punk fan. And I think that sort of like those punk sensibilities come out in his directing style as well.
I'd love to hang out with Iggy Pop. I bet he's fun.
Yeah, I don't think I could keep up even now, though.
He's pretty chill now. Do you ever listen to his Six Music show?
No.
The guy's, his voice is just amazing. You could listen to him reading the phone book. It's just got so deep with his age, but he just he's got, I think it's on Sundays. Check it out, it's really good. It's just really, really relaxing listening to Iggy Pop chat about songs that he's playing.
Interesting. I like it when sort of like those big punk rock stars kind of like take a step back when they get older and then they become sort of like, I don't know, because they've lived a life, haven't they?
Oh, he's lived a life, James. I get the impression Iggy Pop is growing old pretty gracefully for the kind of guy he is. Like, you know, he's become an elder statesman without losing any credibility.
Yeah, and I think sort of like that idea of living a life and then getting to that point where you can sort of look back on it. I think this is kind of like, it's interesting with this character of Otto because like he is right at the start of this journey and he's so sort of aimless. He doesn't know where he's going to go or what he's going to do. He's just lost his job. He's outside moshing in a party. He's with a girl who immediately sleeps with his friend straight after he leaves the room to go get her a beer. And his family life, they're brainwashed by that televangelist character that is also just kind of hovering on the periphery of the plot line, and they've given away all their money, so he can't even fleece them for any cash when he loses his job. Yeah, I think the way that they deal with religion, like in the brief moments they do, is very interesting because it's all commodified, isn't it, in this? Like so much of the film, it's all about sort of like consumerism and all of that kind of stuff. And the way that you like at the very end, you see a priest pop up and then he's sort of like, he's praying when the car comes. I'm not going to go into it now, but like that's the only other real point where you see any sort of religious stuff. The rest is all just this televangelist.
And I think when we first see him on TV, I think he literally says the line, "God wants you to give us money," or something like that. Yeah. That's one of the lines of dialogue that he has. Yeah, very commercialized.
Yeah, and it like, again, every time I think about religion in dystopias now, I think about THX because that had such an interesting kind of view on it with the confession booths and this weird sort of this Jesus-like character who's just telling you to be a good worker and sort of give back to the society in that way.
There's definitely a language of dystopias, isn't there, where the dystopias are in the main about satire of capitalism, and if religion is featured in that dystopia, it's folded in as just another commodity that capitalism uses to drain you of your money and turn you into less than human.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think Otto can see all of that, can't he? To an extent. He's trying to find his way, like I said before. But what do you think about his sort of like his attitude to life and this world that he's in? How does he sort of view this world?
He's just completely, he's removed from it, isn't he? I don't even know if Otto is consciously removed from it. I suppose he is because of the way he quits his job. He's like, but there's something quite, it doesn't seem like a thought out decision from Otto. It's a spur of the moment. He's acting on his instincts, but he's removing himself from the world, saying fuck you to it. But then he just seems completely lost, I think. He doesn't know how to fit in. And we were talking about these elder statesmen of punk like Iggy Pop. I think running into Bud is that for him, isn't he? He takes him under his wing and he's willing to show him the repo ropes and show him this like alternative life. You don't need to be a normal guy with a normal job. Come and join us renegades. It's slightly weird that they cast a repossession firm as these kind of cowboy renegade badasses, even though they're a bit sort of lame. It's not like they're not heroic, but
I think it's something about the fact that everybody hates them as well.
Right, yeah.
And they just don't give a shit, or as much as they can not give a shit. And I think it's something about, there's like a rebellion in that, isn't there, against the norm, because nobody likes some punk who's going to come in and nick your car because you haven't paid your bills. No one's a fan of that, but they are embracing that, and that's how they get paid. And And then, like, when you see Bud, and Bud's sort of showing, like you said, Otto being shown the ropes by Bud, and he's doing speed, and they're going to the bar, and they're doing all of these things. And then later on, when he's hanging out with the other Repo Man, Light, he's like pulling out a gun, and he's being sort of like a badass and firing at people. They're sort of like, they don't care how society views them, and they're kind of like, they're doing all of these rebellious things, yet they're these older characters who are supposed to be wise and giving Otto good life advice. So I think there's definitely something in that.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of criminality involved, like they get into gunfights, they take speed, all of that. But also the key skill of a Repo Man, so I don't know if this is true in real life, but certainly as presented in the film, is being a car thief. It's like this legal, sanctioned criminal lifestyle. So they're just like kind of one rung above criminals, but they're, you know, what they do is legal, and it's a way to make money. It's a career where if you're a successful criminal, you'd be good doing this legitimate job. I think that's what appeals to Otto, because it's like, yeah, it's that kind of lifestyle that is on the outskirts of decent society.
An asshole gets killed for a car. The guys that make it are the guys that get in their cars at any time. Get in at 3 a.m., get up at 4. That's why there ain't a Repo Man I know that don't take speed.
Speed, huh?
Jesus Christ.
I never broke into a car, never hotwired a car, kid. I never broke into a trunk. I shall not cause harm to any vehicle, nor the personal contents thereof, nor through inaction let that vehicle or the personal contents thereof come to harm. It's what I call the repo code, kid. Don't forget it. Etch it in your brain. Not many people got a code to live by anymore. Hey, look at that. Look at those assholes over there.
Yeah, and it's just that first introduction he has to the Repo Man world is really fun. Like when he wanders into the office and he gets offered a beer, and then the first thing he does is pour the beer on the floor, and then everyone's like, oh, that's fine, at least you didn't piss on the floor, because that's what we usually have. And this kind of sort of just embracing of this young character who they know is probably similar to how they used to be.
Yeah, I think
and they're
that's
sort of like, yeah, taking him under their wing. And they do become like a surrogate family for him, don't they? Because his family are just non-existent, really.
Do you think it's that moment of him pouring out the beer? Is that what makes them such a good surrogate family? Because you're saying like maybe they see something in him that reminds them of themselves when they were younger.
Yeah, I think definitely. And like the beer thing's funny as well, because I didn't know this until afterwards, but then all the Repo Men are named after beers.
Yeah, I didn't clock this until after, because I thought Light's name was Mike.
Ah, yeah. So that would ruin all of it.
We've got Bud and Light, so Bud Light.
And then you've got Miller.
Of course, right, okay.
Yeah. So that's quite fun. And like that's a little thing. I mean, Alex Cox has put so many sort of like little touches in this, like little flourishes, which really make this world like a lot more fun, because there's so many little set pieces as well, aren't there? Like when they go to the one of the 7-Elevens or whatever they are, and try and get some booze, and then they're being served by the guy behind the counter. They leave, and then there's a couple of people trying to rob him who pop up from under the desk. Just random stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you know what it really reminded me of? And in particular, because part of my brain was thinking it was set in Los Angeles, it really feels like a pre-Pulp Fiction kind of way of storytelling.
Yeah.
Like it's a Shaggy Dog story of loosely connected weird events that we just sort of stumble through, following a few characters through a few crazy nights in this crazy town. That is the model of Pulp Fiction, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Tarantino must have seen this and sort of taken some sort of inspiration, because you know how Tarantino, all of his works are kind of like, they're like montages almost. They're sort of like, they're taking their bits from elements from different films and putting them together. And I mean, this has those kind of like Pulp Fiction elements in there.
It's sort of, the storytelling is the same, but I wouldn't want to, I like Tarantino, but I think I wouldn't want to do a disservice to Cox to say that this is too similar to that, because Tarantino's like he remixes stuff, doesn't he? And that's what Pulp Fiction is. Whereas Repo Man has that similar structure to the story, but it's a very singular vision. It's not that same sort of like remixing, but that Shaggy Dog story with a MacGuffin that everyone's chasing, which is in a glowing closed, the way the trunk of the Chevrolet opens is exactly the same as the suitcase in Pulp Fiction, isn't it?
Yeah.
What did you think of that MacGuffin in the back of the trunk of the Malibu?
I really liked it because like it was like it's there throughout the story, but it's always in the background and you're kind of like, what the hell's going on? And it is that kind of like, it's the one big overt science fiction element in there, this sort of mysterious thing in the back of this trunk, which could be an alien, could be some sort of crazy nuclear device. You're never quite told what it is, and throughout it there's lots of weird explanations, like Miller goes on some big rant, doesn't he, about how like alien spaceships are time machines and things like that, and there's like these subtle crazy science fiction elements that they just sort of put throughout the film.
Yeah, and you say that's like the main sci-fi element, but what's weird for me, like in my mind, I always, like I said, I didn't remember a great deal of the plot, and I remember it as a dystopian punk story that's a lot of fun to watch, and I completely forgot that there was a whole alien plot tying it all together. Like it is literally a MacGuffin. Like this plot would play out the same. It is more about those loosely connected scenes of Otto learning the ropes of being a Repo Man. It's just that all the characters kind of need something to be chasing so that they can all congregate in the same location at the end of the film. And because it's set in New Mexico, but I might be coming at that from the wrong angle because, again, that's doing a disservice to Alex Cox. Like, he set this in New Mexico for a reason, and he wanted them to all be chasing something UFO-related for a reason as well.
Yeah, but it's like we said, it's sort of like a good place for these characters to congregate as well, isn't it? Like, you get this eclectic mix of people and personalities in that sort of like town because of all the history that's going along around the area. But yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Sort of like that overt sci-fi like nature of the plot in those points, just with the aliens and stuff. But you're right, the dystopian elements I think are the main part of this film. And just going back to sort of the world itself, one of the things I really loved was how none of the sort of like the food products or the drinks or anything, they didn't have packaging like commercial packaging. It was all just like whatever it was labeled as. And I mean, with the beers, at one point they're labeled beer when they call them beer, and then later on they say, oh, we should go get a drink, and then it's just labeled as drink. So all of these fun little bits that they've got in, and during the big sort of shootout scene in the convenience store, you can see lots of other things, like the cereal just says cereal and whatnot. And it reminded me of Dark City, where that had like all of the town was named what it was, like barbershop or whatever, hotel, like it's just called that. And there is something in that about sort of, it's still commercialized, but all of the frills are taken out. Everything's just sort of back to basics.
Yeah, it's kind of like the commercial version of just being served like a plate of gruel in the Matrix, the big old bowl of snot. It feels a bit like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's all that they have, isn't it? They don't have anything else, do they? It's all just this weird plain packaging.
I think so. I think that's what it's supposed to represent, because I remember that from when I've seen it before. But I did notice this time that, like, in the wider shots in the convenience store, you can see there's a banner for Del Monte hanging down. So other brands exist, but I wondered if that was more just like, well, they're limited in what they can do with the set dressing, because what we're focusing on is this blue and white generic brand that's ubiquitous. So I don't know if the Del Monte is just more of just an accident, and it's a low budget film, and they were shooting in a real convenience store.
Yeah, because they had like no budget for this at all. And speaking of no budgets, did you know they made a sequel to this as well?
Yeah, I really want to see it. It came out, oh God, I want to say it came out fairly recently, James, but I've got a horrible feeling it's like 15 years old now.
I think it's like 2009, I think it came out.
Yeah, it's Repo Chick, but I don't think it's a direct sequel. I think it's like set in the same universe and a similar character goes through a similar similar plot, similar kind of journey as Otto.
Yeah, because I watched the trailer for it before today's episode, and it looks like it's on a very small budget. All of it's done by green screen, which is obviously a deliberate part of it. But yeah, it's I don't know how I feel about it. I think it goes off on different tangents because obviously 2009 is very different to 1984 when this one came out. So it's making comments on different parts of society now. I think Repo Chick follows a well-to-do girl who loses her inheritance money and then becomes a repo man and becomes a great repo man, and she's like really good at it because of all of like the nature of her personality, having been brought up a bit well-to-do.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds like it could be an interesting satire again. I did really want to see it when it came out, and I never got around to it.
Yeah, and they did a comic as well. I can't remember what it was called, but it was supposed to, like, Alex Cox did try and get a sequel made, like a direct sequel to this, and then that got released as a graphic novel. I mean, even this film, when we talked about The Matrix, we talked about how the Wachowskis made like comics instead of doing storyboards. They did like proper sort of like comic storyboards to try and show what they would do. With this film, Alex Cox made like a small comic which looked a bit sort of like Beavis and Butthead-esque. It's very sort of like crude drawings, and he was using that as sort of like his pitch. He was sending that to people, and randomly one of the people who really liked it was Michael Nesmith, who was one of the guys from the Monkees who ended up producing the film.
Wow.
Which just seems like a mental sort of course of events. It's just, yeah. So the Monkees are partly the reason this film got made.
It's a bit like the Beatles. Didn't George Harrison finance one of the Monty Python films? He was a big Monty Python fan. But if you scale that down proportionately from Beatles to the Monkees, I think you get scaled down proportionally from Monty Python to Repo Man.
Quite potentially, yeah.
What you got in the trunk?
Oh. You don't want to look in there.
Give me the keys.
So we haven't really talked about the government officials that are just lurking around. So that's where we really see a bit more of an overtly dystopian element, where the kind of society they live in. What did you think of the main one, the woman who's in charge, and the kind of operative characters and the guys in the suits cleaning things up?
Well, again, they're like quirky characters, aren't they? I mean, all of the FBI agents seem to be the cartoon cutout of what you'd expect from a FBI agent. They're all sort of like swept back hair, but they're all blonde as well, which gives it this kind of like, I don't know, kind of Nazi-esque tone to it as well. And then you've got the lead woman who is supposed to have a robot hand, but it's literally, because of budgeting, I imagine, it's just like a glove, and everyone's sort of fascinated by this hand, even though it's clearly just like some sort of like chainmail glove that she's wearing.
Yeah. I don't know if it's even supposed to be robotic. I think some characters just call it a metal hand. I think it's just like a lump of metal. Certainly there's no budget to try and design a robotic hand. Yeah, she's great. And then you've also got the kind of cleanup crews who are just like in the background of a lot of shots, scooping dead bodies off the ground and hauling them into trucks. It's very much like it's a UFO conspiracy theorist's view of the government, isn't it? Like, it's exactly who the people who congregate in Roswell want the government to look like. Scooping up dead bodies mysteriously and menacing Aryan Men in Black type guys.
Yeah, and then sort of like the sort of contrast to that, the alien enthusiasts like Layla and her group, which are part of the what's the name of the museum that they go to? It's got a really funny name, but I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. It spells out UFO.
Oh yeah, is it like it's United Fruitcake something? United
That's
Fruitcake Outlet. Fruitcake being a funny, deliberately funny choice of word for it, because they are a bunch of fruitcakes, aren't they?
Without a doubt. And it's just sort of like, they're the extremists, aren't they? They're the people who you would not trust to be telling the truth. Yet it seems like they know a bit more than everybody gives them credit for, because the FBI are after them and are sort of seeking them out, and they've got connections to this doctor who is driving around in the Chevrolet, this guy who has had a lobotomy, and it's just sort of like driving around with this really dangerous thing in the back of his car.
Yeah, they're the group that seem to. I think you kind of feel like they might have all of the answers regarding the mysterious alien MacGuffin, but they're all taking their cues from this very eccentric J. Frank Parnell. Well, you think he's eccentric, and then at the end of the film, you learn he's actually lobotomized. Like he's really he's struggling to keep things together following a lobotomy that I don't think was particularly willing on his part. And that's who they're taking all their cues from. So I don't think they've got an answer for it. Also, we assume it's an alien thing, but he's banging on about neutron bombs. He was developing a neutron bomb that would vaporize people. So it's very unclear. But then his car does have the ability to fly away into the sky like a glowing green chitty chitty bang bang at the end.
That's the best way of putting it. I didn't think of it like that, but yeah, it is a bit chitty chitty bang bang. But yeah, and that's sort of like the grand finale of the film, isn't it, when that happens? But sort of like leading up to that, what did you think Otto sort of, because this episode is about sort of like work-life balance and dealing with those things. How do you think Otto balances his life as a repo man and his personal life? Because it feels like he doesn't really have much of a life outside of being a repo man, but at the same time he kind of finds his identity a bit by becoming one.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it. I think that he's got very fortunate and has stumbled into his calling. He's good at it, and it seems clear from how we're introduced to him at the start of the film that he's not going to fit in anywhere else. So he's managed to find a job where he will fit in, and he can use his kind of outlier of society skills and put them to good use. And yeah, I was quite happy for him,
Yeah, because he does fit into that world, doesn't he? And like we said, it's all about his character, and he's got the right sort of personality traits to become a repo man, and they have taken him under their wing. But I don't know, I wasn't sure, because like at the end he decides that he doesn't want to stay there being a repo man for the rest of his life.
That's true. Yeah.
And every one of the repo men have like a different idea about what they want to do in the future. And like, because Bud says like, oh, I want to have like my own tow truck, and then a couple of sort of dogs, and then just sort of like keep a scrapyard kind of thing. That's his sort of vision of the future. For Otto, he still doesn't have that clear vision about what to do in this world. So for him, this crazy glowing green car that we're confronted with at the end, that everybody's been chasing, is like a means of escape, isn't it? So he can escape this world where, even though he's found something which he can do and is good at, he can be somewhere else and become a different person. So I don't know, that I felt like there was a bit of that element to it as well by the end.
Yeah, I think that's the right take. Like he has found this job where his skills can be put to use, but Otto, in his core, is an outsider. He feels like an outsider, and even though he's found this place where his skills can be put to use, that feeling of being an outsider, I think, will never leave him. So he literally has to leave the planet Earth because he's never going to fit in. And he goes with Miller as well, who I think is a character who also just doesn't like fit in with society and with the world, but he's less rebellious, I think, than Otto. I think Miller seems like a character who would just get on with things and will, happily live on the outskirts without kicking up a fuss. Otto is someone who more proactively wants to get out, but the two of them kind of pair up at the end and leave Earth because they do not fit in with society, I think.
And like when Otto leaves Layla behind, and then she's suddenly like, but what about our relationship? And he's like, not so sure, I'm off.
Yeah. I think he says, fuck that.
Yeah. And like the whole thing is just sort of like, he doesn't treat the women great, does he? He's kind of like, he's just chasing after people and then just being quite disrespectful the whole time.
No, but we've seen so many characters like that in dystopias, haven't we? They are essentially not likable people. They're bad people, but they're watchable, and it's enjoyable to go on their weird journey with them, and you are rooting for them despite being pretty unpleasant. Like the Warriors, you know, they weren't the best guys, but we're definitely on their side in that film. And Emilio Estevez is so good in this. I don't know how many films he'd done. Is this after his kind of Brat Pack phase?
I think it must have been, because it's pre-Mighty Ducks, isn't it? When he really got going.
Yeah.
With the endless Mighty Ducks sequels.
But he's brilliant in this. He's really charming as this kind of shitty little punk guy who just goes about causing trouble.
Yeah, I think he's perfect for the role. And you're right, there is something about following kind of like a character who you're not 100% on side with for the whole film. And in dystopias, it really works well, because you've got to think as well, they're products of their environment to an extent. So like Otto is the way he is because of everything that he can do and is allowed to do in this world.
What better relationship?
Fuck that.
You shit! I'm glad I tortured you. How could you leave me? I'm the one who's supposed to be in that car.
Yeah, so Otto hasn't really found that work-life balance, has he? The work ultimately takes over too much of his life, and he doesn't find the right balance, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And he kind of like, he wants something more from the world that he can't seem to achieve. And the only way to get it for him is to step into this glowing, potentially nuclear, alien, crazy car, and then fly off into the night. That's how he escapes his dystopia.
Okay, well, shall we move on to our next film and look at how Sam Lowry tries to escape his dystopia?
Yes, I think there's going to be more flying involved as well.
Okay, let's move on to Brazil then.
So Matt, today's episode is all about that work-life balance, and we've also been discussing that exact same topic over on Patreon, haven't we?
Yeah, it's been a kind of heavily office and work-based week for us. We've been working hard, talking about people working hard.
Yes, we recently covered Severance, the new science fiction show on Apple TV over on Patreon. We did a whole special episode on that. So if you want some more work-life balance talk, more discussion about science fiction topics, and of course, deep analysis of that crazy show, which is just brilliant, cannot recommend that enough, then head over to our Patreon site and you can listen to that.
Yeah, it's patreon.com/journey through sci-fi. You can listen to our episode on Severance and our whole back catalogue of stuff that we've been recording for patrons only. So head on over and check it out.
Yes, but in the meantime, we better get back to work and chat about Terry Gilliam's Brazil.
Do you wake from your finest fantasy only to return to your daily nightmare? Is your mother about to look younger than you do? Does the woman of your dreams,
I love you. In my dreams, I love you,
still have a few doubts? Then it's time to take a stand. To break out of your dull, humdrum life and into Brazil.
You're so pleased you could make it right this way.
So Terry Gilliam's back. Not on the podcast, of course, just the topic of the podcast once again.
Yes, very, very happy to be watching a Terry Gilliam film and discussing Terry Gilliam again. So what we've done previously, we did 12 Monkeys in our time travel, and Zero Theorem was part of our VR series, wasn't it?
Yes, and like since then, Gilliam has, I think we mentioned this when we talked about Zero Theorem, that Gilliam has called those other two part of a trilogy, his dystopian satire trilogy. So all of those films kind of fall into that sort of bracket for him. But he's also got another trilogy, which he was trying to talk about previously before he'd done all of those 3 films. And Brazil slotted into that one as well, which was his trilogy of imagination, which included Time Bandits and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen and Brazil, of course. So he's kind of like mixing his films up into weird trilogies just because of their sort of like their themes. And I think this is something which Gilliam comes back to again and again in his films. There's certain things which really interest him. One of those is imagination and escapism, and one of those obviously is dystopias and sort of like satire. And Brazil does fall into both those categories. It's got the escapism side, but it's also rooted in this deeply dystopian world. So why do you think Gilliam comes back to those things, and why do you think he's so good at creating dystopias? Because I mean, 12 Monkeys and Zero Theorem, like I know we both really enjoyed those, but he's definitely got a style to his work, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think that something that comes across really clearly in Brazil is that he has like he has some very relatable frustrations about just the nature of daily life. I think that's what Brazil is all about. It's about being frustrated about a certain type of job, or if you don't work in that job, being frustrated with a certain type of bureaucracy that you encounter in your life, regardless of if you work for the kind of job that Sam Lowry does in this film. And I think that he's so good at it because he's got this, fantastic comedy background. So you can make jokes about that sort of thing, like, oh, isn't it frustrating that we all have to deal with this annoying thing? It's very easy to make jokes about that, but you can also the more frustrated you get and the more angry you get, if you want to lean away from just being funny about it and say, no, it's actually really frustrating and it will drive you completely out of your mind if you have to deal with it all of the time. That's what's at the heart of Brazil, I think. Because Brazil's really funny. There's some really good gags in there.
Yeah.
But it's not a comedy, is it? Like it's much more... There's much more tragedy than comedy, I'd say.
Yeah, it's quite disturbing as well, isn't it? Because of just some of the stuff that happens in this film is really dark.
Yeah.
But my sort of like first watch of this film was when I was off school and I was sick. So I watched it in this kind of like half ill, dream-like state of mind.
What a nightmare.
So that's how I always see that now. And because it's a long running time, and I think I was falling in and out of sleep when I was watching. I had to pause it, and it's just like I have all of those kind of emotions connected to it, because obviously like there are bits of it which kind of turn your stomach a bit. And obviously when I watched it when I was feeling ill, I've kind of got that kind of connection to it, which is like a really weird thing to have with a film, but it's so sort of apt for this particular one.
That's really interesting. My early experience of it, I think I probably watched it at a similar age to you, like young teens when I saw it first. And I haven't seen all of Gilliam's films, but I've seen most of them. And I think that his films do actually appeal to teenagers quite well, because he's got a good sense of sci-fi action. It's not really action, 12 Monkeys, but it's a rollicking sci-fi adventure film. Adventure, I think, is the word I'm looking for. Like, he really infuses his films with a lot of adventure, which is entertaining for any age. So when he's putting in the more social satire, that's threaded in his films. But Brazil, despite the fantasy sequences, which have that kind of the visual cues of his more fantasy adventure style, this film isn't that. And the stuff that really appeals to me about Brazil now, as an adult with a job, was all lost on me as a teenager. So I think that as I've aged, I appreciate this film an awful lot more.
Yeah, because this film is really about that sort of work-life balance, isn't it? And like, which we're talking about in today's episode. And one of the elements of that is paperwork. And it seems like this entire film and this world that Gilliam has created is shaped by paperwork and forms and regulations and all of this kind of stuff that is the root of the problems for people in this society. And they're kind of like oblivious to it as well. But what did you think about Gilliam making that such a big part of the film, and how does he kind of like go about showing that throughout?
So there's the two kind of introductions to it, isn't there? The one introduction is the family just sort of very innocently going about Christmas and, you know, having a nice wholesome family Christmas, and jackbooted government thugs can not just kick down your door, but like slice open your ceiling and, you know, come. They invade your space. That violence can just break into your personal space at any time in this world, and you can be thrown into a sack for interrogation and billed for the pleasure of that. You know, that's a great extra element of it. The whole people have to pay for their own interrogation element. That's the first introduction to that world. And then the second introduction is when we first see Sam Larry's office, that incredible tracking shot that pulls all the way through the perfectly monochrome or monotone office, all grey, everything's grey, all the suits are grey. And there's all the ducts everywhere, the sort of this visual motif of air ducts that just sort of, it's like the entire world is made of air ducts in this film. And it's even like, I think it's like the first line of dialogue, isn't it, on the TV screen? I want to talk to you about ducts.
There's a great advert, isn't there? And then they're sort of like, here are the new ducts that we've got, and they've just basically got like wallpaper over them to make them a little less garish.
So those are our two introductions to this world. Your private life can be intruded and you can be thrown into a sack for interrogation. And at work, you just exist in this kind of grey netherworld full of pipes and ducts.
Yeah, and like endless mountains of paper, because like you look at all of their desks, they've got loads and loads of things they're processing. They're all on computers all the time, and people are busying about. And this sort of like goes to the extreme later on when Sam moves departments. And then when he joins the new department, there's sort of like, it's a different kind of space, isn't it? It's like small offices where it's quite intense, but then you leave your office and then your boss will come charging down with a group of people chasing him, throwing papers up and down. And then it becomes sort of like, it's that regulation to it, because you know that he's going to be around there. Sort of, he's monitoring you, making sure you're doing your work. And it's all that kind of stuff, because it's quite claustrophobic as well, isn't it? Like, you're either in an office full of people where you've got little personal space, or you're in a smaller office, again, by yourself, which continuously gets smaller and smaller throughout the film, which is another great gag. Or you're at home, and your home is like a small flat, which you can't really escape anywhere from. The whole thing is very tight, isn't it?
Yeah, and your flat can be intruded by, any number of government or non-government workers who can get the right form or just ignore a form and burst in with a gun and basically come and do what they want to your private space. Technology was really interesting in this film as well. You said they're all on computers, but they're on like a very specific type of computer, aren't they? With that, it's a tiny, tiny screen with an enormous lens. There's a lot of sort of useless, extraneous technology. Like we see it in Sam's flat. He has a kind of Wallace and Gromit setup to wake him up and serve him breakfast, but it doesn't really work. Like it's quite Douglas Adamsy, isn't it? The kind of like there's lots of technology, but the technology is slightly pointless and doesn't always work as well as it should, and it's kind of getting in the way. Yeah, I really liked the setup of his flat. That, pouring tea on the toast and all that stuff.
Yeah, it really annoyed me when he didn't eat the bread, because, as you know, and I don't know if the listeners know, I really love bread, and he's got a piece of bread which is partly toasted, but it's fine. But just because it flops about a bit, he won't eat it, and that really annoyed me.
So
really.
You love bread so much you would eat toast that had been accidentally soaked in tea.
It looked fine. I would have given it a go. I was just like, it's just because he didn't even try it. It just kept flopping out, and he was like, oh, forget it. And I was like, just give it a bite at least. Come on, Sam.
I hereby inform you under powers entrusted to me under Section 47, Paragraph 7 of Council Order Number 438476 that Mr. Buttle Archibald, residing at 412 North Tower, Shangri-La Towers, has been invited to assist the Ministry of Information with certain inquiries, and that he is liable to certain financial obligations as specified in Council Order RB/CZ/907/X. Sign here, please.
But all of those elements you were talking about, sort of like the technology, and also it's specifically the invasion of privacy that happens, that's all very much like 1984, isn't it? And at one point, Gilliam jokingly titled this 1984 and a half. And I think that's kind of like a good sort of description of it, because it is kind of like this Orwellian, like, story, isn't it? It's kind of got those kind of chops that, like, even like Huxley and Brave New World is kind of like in that kind of realm, isn't it, for like an audience later down the line. It's got all of that kind of stuff, and it's very telling of the time, because to me it seems like a parody of present day 1985 as well, because there's obviously like people having jobs where there's lots of paperwork and regulations are coming in about stuff, and it's all done to the extreme. So I feel like it's definitely got those comparisons to 1984, but I was interested to see sort of like what you thought about those comparisons, and whether they, like, what are the differences as well between this and something like 1984?
Well, I think it's the humour that sets it apart. I think if this film leaned even more into the humour, it would just be an out and out parody of 1984, and that would be fine. That's not a problem. But I think because Gilliam wants to do other things with it than just that humour, and actually does want to do his own dystopia film, more straight down the line dystopia, it kind of circles back to similarities with 1984. I think the ending is sort of functionally the same ending as 1984, but sitting within Gilliam's universe and looking through Gilliam's lens on that. And I think Sam Larry is a pretty similar character to Winston, and he kind of goes on basically the same trajectory, doesn't he? He's relatively content, even though he sees he does sort of see the dystopia for what it is, but he's not really going to do anything about it and wants to keep his head down. Then he meets a woman, and then things spiral out of control, and he is ultimately tortured and broken by the dystopia. That's the exact same character arc as Winston, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think the societies themselves are slightly different, because whereas 1984 was all about stamping out individualism and being very careful about how sort of information is controlled, this has those elements, but also it comes down to more sort of about human error, and by putting so many regulations on things, if you get one tiny problem with something, everything comes crashing down. And it's all about those sort of things that they put in place to try and keep control of this chaotic world, but in doing so, they're just leaving themselves open for more problems.
Yeah, so in 1984, you are paralysed by force, aren't you? You're paralysed by intimidation. There is an element of that in Brazil with the information retrieval officers and the kind of authority they have, but I think for the vast majority of the population in Brazil, you're paralysed by paperwork. You're paralysed by it not being worth your effort to try and do anything at all, basically. Yeah. Just go with the flow, because there's so many levels of bureaucracy that you're going to have to go through to do anything outside of what we really want you to do, that it's literally not worth your time and effort to try and do that. Whereas in 1984, you'd be pulled aside and either brainwashed or executed for straying from any kind of norm. But in Brazil, it's just hard to do that. There's one interesting similarity, I think, in what they were trying to achieve in 1984 through the use of language. So I think that they were trying to actually create a dystopia quite similar to Brazil, weren't they? Because the idea with what's it called, the language, Newspeak.
Yeah.
Newspeak would, when fully implemented rebellion and rebellious thoughts would be physically impossible because you simply wouldn't have the language in your brain to think controversial thoughts. That's sort of a similar thing where they were just trying to construct a world where it was just too much effort to try and be rebellious. And Brazil, they seem to have got there through layer after layer after layer of bureaucracy stopping you from doing anything in your life.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the thing is, like, Sam has an understanding of that, doesn't he? He knows that the world is built in that way. So the way he tries to fit into it is to go fly under the radar. And he does that by sticking with his normal job, doing sort of minimal effort, even though he's really good at his job. He's always helping his boss out, isn't he? He's always giving him advice and sorting stuff out. And that's sort of like how he's navigating this strange world. So his way, he doesn't try and seek out promotions or anything. And the only reason he does that is because his dreams become about this woman who he eventually meets, and he wants to track her down. And that's when his sort of work life and his personal life have this weird sort of balancing act, because his work life then becomes about his personal life. So then he does start seeking all these promotions and seeking ways to find out more information about this mysterious girl. But I think there's something very interesting about the way that he is navigating the world by trying to just fly under the radar.
Yeah, despite being so good at his job, he could really be successful if he wanted to be. But I think as we're introduced to him, he does have exactly the right balance, doesn't he? Like his personal life isn't great, but what we see throughout the movie is that the fantasy element, I think, it seems to bring quite a lot to Sam. Like, I think he derives genuine pleasure from his fantasies, even though to an external viewer, it seems like it isn't much of a life, I think. But he just seems happy at the start of the film, doesn't he? Like, keeping his head down. He's got a bit of a, as much as a sort of stuffy British bureaucrat in the 80s can have, he's got a bit of swagger, hasn't he, at work? Because he knows he's good at it. He knows his boss is 100% dependent on him for everything. And he's getting exactly what he wants, which is nothing, which is no promotion, no movement. I think as we're introduced to him, he's quite happy, and he has the right balance, right? And I think it gets worse for him as the film goes on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also fits into how the rest of the people in the society sort of view how they're being treated as well. Because for a lot of them, they don't really feel like they're being oppressed, do they? They're sort of quite happy to go about their lives and do their normal thing. But there is something about a lack of awareness about what's going on in the world as well, because everyone is kind of keeping to themselves and doing what they normally do. I mean, prime example of that is the meal that they go on. So Sam goes on a meal with his mum, and during that meal, there's explosions going off in the background. Yet they're quite happy just to ignore what's going on, and just carry on having their meal. And even there's something even about the meal which is kind of like oppressive, like, because the waiter comes over and says you can pick a number and we will make that food. Everything on the menu is like a set number, and then all Sam wants is a steak, medium rare. And the waiter loses his shit because he has to say the number. He can't just order something like a normal person. It has to be that specific thing. So I think my question mainly is sort of, how do you feel about the rest of the people in this society? And are they all trying to do what Sam's doing and kind of like ignore what's going on and just go about their daily business because it is less effort to sort of be oblivious to it?
Yeah, they definitely are. And I think that's another thing that we're introduced to early on, because that explosion is one of the many terrorist attacks that's happening throughout the film. And we're told at the start of the film that it's in its 13th year of this systematic terrorist bombing of the country, which the minister on TV chalks up to beginner's luck, as if the 13th year of a terrorist campaign is still in its like earliest phases in his beginner's luck. It's, very, very head in the sand as a society, on a societal level. The country is burying its head in the sand about everything. So I think that simmers down to the individual level as well. And Sam's doing that as well, isn't he? At the start of the film, it's the course of events and the people that he runs into that pull him out of that and force him to interact more directly with the world, which is ultimately his downfall. It doesn't work out for him.
And do you think that has something to do with the kind of dehumanization that's happening in this dystopia? As you always say, dehumanization is the key word for these dystopian episodes. It comes up again and again. And for the people in this particular film, they are oblivious, but they're also lacking empathy in what's happening to other people. So case in point would be when Sam is in the lingerie store and there's another explosion that goes off, and then he's trying to help these old ladies which have been blown up, and nobody really cares and nobody's trying to do anything. And then suddenly, like, the jackboot guys come up and they're sort of tearing these people away and then putting them in sort of the truck or whatever they're doing, disposing of them. And again, that's kind of like a lack of empathy. Yeah,
they're all just drones. And I guess that empathy comes from... The empathy is tied to a sense of individualism. So if you are able to break free of being a kind of grey drone, oblivious to the world, then and become a more individualistic person, then you're able to see other people as other individuals and feel a sense of empathy to them. And it's Sam's interactions with Harry Tuttle and Jill, who are both quite individualistic, that bring him out of it and make him start to be more of an individualistic character. But he obviously wants to be that because in his fantasies, he is this heroic fantasy figure flying through the sky and holding a sword and saving a damsel in distress. So he dreams of being that kind of a person, but he is unable to do that until he meets those kind of people in real life who show him another way of existing outside of the dystopia.
And part of the reason I think for that is obviously the whole sort of mix up with the Tuttle and Buttle thing. So everyone is viewing that in kind of a nonchalant way. Like the main part of that they're worried about is that they fucked up and that they're going to get told off for it, or they're going to have some sort of repercussions. And they're continuously passing the buck and blaming different departments. And in reality, it was just a mistake because there was a fly in the room, the typewriter moved, and then that's how this whole thing came about. But there is something in that as well, I think, just in terms of sort of work-life balance, like the worst thing that you can have in a workplace is someone who either shirks their responsibilities or is continuously blaming someone else for a mishap or mix-up. And that's taken to a whole new extreme when these mishaps and mix-ups lead to someone being killed.
Yeah, someone is killed, and also that shirking of responsibility and passing the buck is happening at an institutional level. It's the department. It's not... Kurtzman wants to do it personally, like it is happening at the individual level, but it's been sent to them by one department and another department. And again, another dehumanizing element along the way. It's cost a human life, but none of those departments will refer to it as death. They've all got a euphemism for it, and they're all using a different euphemism. He's been deleted. He's been, he's no longer active, stuff like that. And it's Sam's willingness to help out his boss just to keep things on the down low that forces him to interact with that death at a human level and see the human cost of it when he meets Buttle's wife. That I think that's when things start to come home for Sam about how horrible things are at an institutional level. And it's also timed with him meeting Jill for the first time, who is one of these characters that is going to help him on that journey. And the other character that he meets on that journey is Tuttle, the real Tuttle. So, but, it's not just this weird coincidence that he has to interact with. He also meets the real guy. What did you think of Robert De Niro as Harry Tuttle and his entrance into Sam's world?
I thought it was a fascinating character to have in there. Just this, because he's not your typical idea of what a rebel would be in a dystopian society. He is just a heating engineer who just goes around doing these sort of like good deeds almost, fixing people's heating and air conditioning or whatever.
Well, I would argue that he is exactly that type of character for a dystopia. It's just he happens to do a job that is not typical of those characters. Like everything about him is the typical cowboy heroic adventurer, like zip lining into a situation with a gun and fixing all the problems and then whooshing out of the scene. It just so happens that the problems that need to be resolved for Sam are like air conditioning problems with his ducts, these omnipresent ducts. So he's this outsider who sits outside of society and does whatever the hell he wants. It just so happens that whatever the hell he wants to do is fix people's heating.
Yeah, and he talks about it in a way that he says, doing this is meant to be an adventure. I want to go and do my job and then like get in there, get out, and sort of get everything done, save the day, and then that's what he wants to do. But because of the world that they're in, that isn't possible without a 266 / whatever the name of the forms are. So the hero in a world like this would be your average Joe who is just going around doing the good deeds, helping people out and cutting through the paperwork. But of course, him doing all of that is what eventually gets Lowry into all these problems, isn't it? Because he has an illegal bit of equipment in his air conditioning, and then when the bureaucrat guys do turn up again, then they absolutely fuck it all up.
yeah Tuttle's Tuttle's great, and De Niro's, it's such a good performance from De Niro because it's very straight-faced from him. He's just this iconoclastic cowboy figure who just wants to help out, but that puts him at odds with a dystopian world, and it elevates him to a greater role than the character really aspires to, I think.
Getting warm.
You couldn't what? Couldn't stand the what?
Paperwork. Couldn't stand the paperwork. Listen, this whole system of yours could be on fire, and I couldn't even turn on a kitchen tap without filling out a 27B/6. Bloody paperwork.
I suppose one has to expect a certain amount.
Why? I came into this game for the action, the excitement. Go anywhere, travel light, get in, get out, wherever there's trouble, a man alone. Now they got the whole country sectioned off. You can't make a move without a form.
His sort of heroic deeds are to do with the consumerism of the society as well, aren't they? Because all of these ducks are part of their flats, and they're selling them as a consumerist product. So they've got all of that element, but there is so much consumerism in this film. And I think one of the main bits for me, which I found so interesting, were the sort of facelifts and the cosmetic surgeries. First off, what did you think about those? Because they're iconic, aren't they?
Yeah, so grotesque. I think the very first introduction to that is the iconic cheek stretching scene, because I think that's the first time we meet Sam's mother, who is this very powerful figure in society. She's kind of got connections all across government, but she's introduced as a slightly inhuman, monstrous figure, isn't she? Being stretched to remove her wrinkles, but it's really grotesque and horrible.
Yeah, it's that, and then obviously the first time you see his mother, and then later on you see her look visibly younger than she did. Yeah. So that's quite a shock. But then also the comparison to her friend who is undergoing acid surgery, and just the deterioration of her throughout the film is it's just like, again, it's another grotesque thing, because the types of things which people will put themselves through in order to look better cosmetically and look younger, even though they aren't, I think it's such a fascinating thing. And also, like, now you look at things like people get veneers done. And if you, like, I didn't realize until recently what they do to get veneers. So, like, they will shave down your original teeth to a point where they're like spikes. And then they put like plastic veneers over the top, or porcelain veneers, or whatever they are, and that's how they do it. Like some of the images you can find on Google are grotesque, but these are the kind of things which people will put themselves through in order to be classed as like attractive in society. And just when you see the sort of reality of those things, Gilliam is doing this in 1985, and then cosmetic surgery has changed so much over this time period. Like everybody's getting like injections in their arse to have bigger bums, and like we already knew sort of like about sort of like breast implants, and like as well, like men are getting like 6-pack implants and things like that. There's all of this crazy cosmetic stuff that's going on. And it's like looking at the grotesque aspects of that in a dystopian society, I think, is fascinating. For Gilliam to be doing it back then, yeah, it shows a lot.
Yeah, it's truly horrible. I love the contrast between her getting slowly younger. In all fairness, like Sam's mother is completely succeeding. Like she does look younger throughout the film, but she's contrasted against her friend who is melting. Yeah. Just getting more and more sort of dissolved by the acid as the film goes on. But it's just like a pissing contest between the doctors as well, isn't it? We see their respective doctors meet at a party and have this sort of snotty argument about whose technique is better. So it's all just it's a pissing contest for them. It's a pissing contest for the women who are getting it done because they just want to have the best one. It's all just these little sort of high society snipes at each other to be better than the other person.
Exactly, and they've got all of this stuff going on, but then also like the weird presents that they keep giving out.
I love those. Yeah, it took me ages to clock actually, because they're all giving identical boxes, and it wasn't until I had to pause the movie because there's a great moment where Sam runs into Jack, Michael Palin, his friend, and Jack gives him a gift as though he had, deliberately bought Sam a gift. But he takes it from a stack of like 6 identical boxes that are clearly ready to go to anyone he sees. Did you see what they were all giving each other in those identical boxes?
I couldn't work it out.
It's the exact same thing that Sam's mother gives him. The executive paperweight yes-no device, the decision-making device.
So I knew it was the same device, but yeah, go on.
Oh, okay, right. So, well, it's just some like, it's like the clacky balls that executives would have sitting on the desk, but it's similar to that. But everyone is giving each other the exact same thing in the silver boxes. It's just like the gift. I got the impression it was like this year's gift, and everyone is just expected to buy the exact same thing. But like Sam receives 2 at that lunch and the box is already opened. And Jack's just got this stack of like 6 of them to give to everyone he sees. I love that kind of uniform consumerism where we're all just told what we're going to have this year, and you're going to get like 12 executive decision-making paperweight things.
And there is something in the fact that they are all paperweights, and they're all relating back to workplaces.
Yeah.
So that's where you spend your life. You spend your life in the workplace, so your gift will be work-related. And if it's a decision-making tool as well, that again adds another element, because it takes the burden out of that, because you're having to make decisions throughout the day at work, and if you're using this tool all the time to help you out, it's like, where's that going to lead?
It's something that I think Kurtzman would enjoy the most, that complete abdication of responsibility in a very senior position at work, to just have a little thing on his desk where he could just say yes or no. I think that's something that he'd particularly like. Whereas it doesn't, Sam's not bothered by it. He just fiddles with it. I don't think he's really using it to make decisions, is he?
No, exactly. I mean, Sam is he's spending his time trying to find out about this mysterious woman that he's dreaming about in these sort of weird dream sequences. So just talking about the dream sequences as well, they were kind of like, they were predicting the future as well. And this is something which Gilliam did in 12 Monkeys, as in a different way with the time travel elements in there. But with this, what did you think about the fact that there's so much stuff that Sam is dreaming about that kind of like happens in the film?
I don't know. I didn't really put too much stock in it. I thought that I got the impression Sam's just a dreamer, and I think we're supposed to take it at face value that Jill is literally the woman of his dreams, and that he's predicted that somehow. But I don't know if it was more just that he's so bored at work and he has these fantastical dreams that she's just a nice woman, you know, and it's good enough for him and he'll latch on to that. How much do you think he was literally seeing Jill in a prescient kind of vision?
Well, I think, it all kind of leads into that, doesn't it? Like, he is... I don't know if it's like that deja vu element, isn't it? Where he's seeing all these things in the real world, but they are deliberately happening in his dreams before he sees them. So I don't know. It's like it just adds that extra sort of like fantasy element to it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's one way of looking at it, like that they are then happening in the real world. But I think that there's also just an element of he's layering his own fantasy on top of what's happening independently in the real world. So if he ends up getting in a fight with someone, an authority figure, then that authority figure becomes the giant samurai from his fantasies. I don't know. I'm not sure to what extent he was literally predicting the future and to what extent he was just allowing his fantasy to bleed into and layer over his real life because he wanted it to, because he wants to live out his fantasies. So if he sees a woman who looks a little bit like his dream woman, and I know it's the same actress in both scenes, but it's a very subjective sort of storytelling technique, isn't it? He just sees, I think he's just seeing a woman in real life and saying, I like the look of her, she can be my damsel in distress. I'm losing my mind in this dystopia. I'm going to try and find her and see if she'll be the woman of my dreams.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And I think it's Gilliam's clever sort of filmmaking where he's throwing in bits like, oh, she'll wear a wig that looks like the one, like the image of the woman he has in his head, and like the weird baby masks which recur later on. It's all kind of like subtle precursors, but because this world is so random, he's kind of like he's dreaming up these elements and they're somehow fitting into the world, which is grim. So he needs these escapist moments to sort of get out of there.
Yeah, those baby masks, I mean, for me, it's one of the most memorable, strange and just bizarre moments in the film. But there's a lot of them, isn't there? What kind of moments stuck out for you from your delirium being sick and watching it as a kid?
There's so many. I think one of them is the moment where they're doing a shot of the city. And there's a few of these where it looks all nice. And there's one bit where they've got loads of like factory spires or whatever they are. And then it's just that then you suddenly see this massive old man and he's over it. And it's just a model. And then you see the real world and that one. And then like when they've got these idealized homes that they keep showing, these sort of like 50s super homes where you've got like the ideal Americanized kind of life, which we've talked about previously in other episodes. And then they're taken away and there's one of the guys in a hazmat suit just waving as it gets blown up and things like that. I loved all of those elements to it.
I think that's one, that one you just mentioned where the home with the hazmat guy is literally picked up and lifted out of shot to reveal an enormous factory just spewing black smoke and fire into the sky, and that whole sequence and then there's more hazmat guys like playing volleyball as Sam and Jill drive through it. That's fantastic imagery, and for me, all of that really comes to a natural conclusion with Sam's fantasy sequence at the end of the movie, which is just like a culmination of all of those crazy, fantastic his own fantasy and the fantastical elements of the strange Gilliam universe around him that he's just tumbling through in like a dream state.
Yeah, and it's like all of the things which, because it is so absurd, this world as well, because you think about moments like, one of the other hilarious moments which I really enjoyed was obviously all the stuff with Bob Hoskins and his sidekick messing around with the ducks, and then the moment that Tuttle switches out the pipes and then suddenly their hazmat suits are filled up with shit.
Yeah.
Like moments like that, the absurdist things that are going on in this world, the way that people are treating each other, the explosions in the background, all of that makes this final sequence that Sam is having seem like it could be plausible.
Just about, isn't it? Yeah, I think there's the telltale moments. I think the first time you see the film, like Tuttle literally disappearing under a mound of paperwork, or being swallowed up by paperwork and then seemingly ingested by it. That's like pure fantasy. The body has physically disappeared. And then I feel like the first time I saw this film, it wasn't until Sam ends up in the funeral of the woman who's been dissolved by acid, and then like tumbles through the coffin, and then like a Narnia or Alice in Wonderland moment, he finds himself in the street of his dreams. I think it wasn't really until that moment, the first time I saw it, where I was like, this isn't real. We've slipped into fantasy now, and we're in a dreamscape. But you're right, like until you get that clear signal that something physically impossible has happened, he's transitioned through a barrier that he physically couldn't transition through. Everything else is completely believably strange based on the world that Gilliam's built up throughout the film.
Yeah, because even the lead up to that with the when he's being processed by all of these government agents and he's in that sort of that crazy suit, he's all bound up and he's just seeing agent upon agent and somebody at a desk saying, oh yeah, it'll cost this much, you should do this, plead like this because your credit rating will go down. It's still so sort of like consumer led as well, and it's fantastical as well at the same point. So when he gets to that point where he's in that chair, in that room, in this massive room where he is being tortured by his friend wearing a mask, it's kind of like you can imagine that maybe he gets out and then Tuttle rescues him and then this happens. But then, yeah, like you say, when he does disappear off into that coffin, even then I was kind of hoping that, okay, maybe it is okay and this is sort of like part of it's a dream and then part of it is actually going to happen. He is going to be rescued by Tuttle and he is going to make his escape, and it's just all blurred in his mind because he's got so much going on. Like watching this when I was sick as a teenager off school, I did not know what was going on. And I think even now watching it, I'm kind of like, is it going to be a happy ending? But no, it ends like any good dystopia does.
Yeah, well, yeah, it has to end that way, doesn't it? It's the 1984 ending that I think is key to how Gilliam was interested in structuring the film. But there are other versions of this film, aren't there? And it took... It had a bit of a journey to getting onto the screen because it's mad, and like what big studio would want anything to do with a film like this? Like, I can completely understand it given how studios tend to think. But I've not seen the theatrical edit or the TV edit or whatever it's called. But you can tell when you watch it, you could see where it might have ended. There is after they have sex, basically after Jill and Sam have that love scene near the end of the film, that's like a happy ending moment. And then I wonder if there's a moment you could end it where it does seem like Tuttle has rescued him. But I don't know. Have you seen either of those versions? Do you know?
I don't know if they actually exist or not, because I know 20th Century Fox. So I think the story is that when Gilliam was making it, there was another team editing the end at the same time that he was, unbeknownst to him, and then he got wind of it. So he showed his edit he did some sort of screening, and out of that it won a bunch of awards, or it was nominated for some awards. And then because of that, 20th Century Fox couldn't be like, oh right, we'll just change the ending, because all of these critics have seen it and they know the ending and it's been awarded stuff. So at that point, they have to be like, right, we've got to put it out as Gilliam's done it. Like, we have to put out this long cut because there's no going back.
I think you've got to get like the special edition DVD, and I think it's a bit like Blade Runner. I do think that you can track down those the crap version that was the producer's preferred version, but I think this has had a better go of things than Blade Runner. Like, I think that Gilliam's version was the one that saw light of day primarily, and it is the main version. And I don't think he had to fight, like you said, like there was a fight on his hands to get it out, but he didn't then have to kind of keep going back to it as Ridley Scott did and making changes.
Yeah, and I think this is something which we've seen in several dystopias throughout the series, that there is something about when you're an audience watching a dystopian film, part of you wants it to have a happy ending. You want that sort of light at the end of the tunnel. We saw it in Conquest at the Planet of the Apes. We saw it there. We've seen it in Blade Runner. I know we haven't covered it in this particular series, but again, it's like a dystopian world. So there is something about like an audience wanting this resolution that is happy, but in order to tell these cautionary tales that are dystopias, ending on a bleak note makes it stick with you longer and gives you that sense of fear.
He's got away from us, Jack. Afraid you're right, Mr. Helpman. He's gone. Oh.
I think the message in these two films is that also you know you're not going to find happiness in your work life in a dystopia. So for Sam Lowry, it's absolutely catastrophic, and he disappears into himself in order to find any kind of happiness. And I think he is happy at the end of the film, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a happy ending to the film. And for Otto in Repo Man, it's a complete removal of himself from the entire planet, I think.
That's the only way out.
Yeah, but it's removing himself from a dystopian kind of world. I think that's the only way out, and you're not going to find happiness in your work. And we've seen it. Yeah, we've seen it in loads of them. Like a happy ending is often hard to achieve in a dystopia, but the happiest ending you can get is some form of escape, getting away from that.
Yeah, so it seems like in a dystopia you can't get that work-life balance right. The only way to escape is through some sort of fantasy.
I think so. Yeah. Or an internal fantasy or something fantastical happening to you for these two characters anyway.
Yeah. And just thinking about the ending of Brazil again, just the way that he dreams of being in this lush green countryside, living with the girl of his dreams, away from all of this work life in like a secluded area. And then even when we've seen stuff like that, like in Mad Max, for instance, he lives that life where he's in a secluded area away from his work, but his work creeps in and gets him. So having this work-life balance is such a tough thing. And I think we can learn from these two films that you've got to keep it balanced, guys. You've got to have like a good personal life outside of work, as well as working really hard and doing all of these like jobs, like office jobs, whatever your job is. You've got to sort of like be able to balance it with the fantasy side as well. You've got to escape into films like these.
Yeah, or just don't work and be a career criminal, and you'll pick up something legitimate and become a Repo Man, maybe.
Hey, I mean, it's an option. So I think that does wrap up our episode today on work-life balance. What do we have in store next week then, Matt?
Next week, I'm very excited. We're going to be joined by the brilliant Becky Dark to talk to us about Instruments of War. And what are the two films that we're looking at for that, James?
So for that episode, we are looking at Starship Troopers.
Oh, yes.
Yes, a classic Verhoeven film there. And we're also going to be looking at Alita Battle Angel from Rodriguez.
Very strange movie that. I've got weird memories of that, so it's going to be interesting to see how I feel about that one. But I love Starship Troopers, so really excited for that one.
Yeah, and it's going to be great to chat to Becky about that film. Yeah, I'm very excited to have her on the podcast and get her perspective on those two films. I know she's a big 90s film buff, so talking Starship Troopers is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we are looking forward to that. If you want more from us in the meantime, you can always head over to patreon.com/journey through sci-fi to enjoy all our bonus content there and support the show, of course. Or you can get in touch with us. Why don't you drop us a line at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com or come and join our Facebook discussion group.
Yes, all the ways that you can find us online. And of course, if you don't want to sign up to Patreon, you can always head on to your podcast subscription of choice, whatever you use to get your podcasts, and leave us a lovely review. Why don't you tell us what your dream work job would be in a science fiction dystopia?
That's all for this time. Join us next time for Instruments of War.